if you're talking to some guy that's, let's say he's in high school, senior year of high school, and he knows that he wants to play a role in designing video games, like what guidebook would you give to him?
uh, if you want to be a character artist, you can do it. The walls are only there to make sure that you want it badly enough, right? You know, almost every professional I've talked to has had some kind of college background. Most of them have. They almost all say it was not worth the money.
What does a character artist actually do?
You see this in college, especially, where people are like, yeah, I like playing video games, so I must like making them too. Realize those are very, very different jobs. To see one of my characters come to life when you have a professional person rig it up, another professional person animate it, another professional add the special effects to it. Extraordinary, man. I mean, the people around me have abilities that I consider to be magical.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Jeremy with Career Lab. Today, I'm interviewing my good friend Colton Orr, who's a character artist for Insomniac Games. It's the company that's behind Ratchet and Clank and also the latest Spider-Man video game on PS4. We cover a couple of topics. Number one, we talk about if you want to get into the video game industry as a character artist, what are steps you can take? Number two, we cover what does a character artist actually do and what does the day-to-day look like. Number three, we talk about some of the myths that surround the profession and why a lot of people in the industry are actually not too happy with the profession. And last, we talk about different career paths that you can take as a character artist. So we talk about startups versus bigger companies. We talk about freelance. We talk about going the management route or more the creative route. I hope you enjoy the interview. If you enjoy it, make sure to leave a like. We really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions for Colton, make sure to leave them in the comments and I'll ask him to review a couple and answer you guys. All right, I hope you enjoy the interview. Let's get started. So, I guess to start off, can you tell me and people that are watching a little more about what your story is about getting in the industry, where you started, where you're at now, and what that journey has been like?
Yeah, sure. So I think it makes sense to start with the fact that I was homeschooled all the way through school. So I spent a lot of time in New Hampshire growing up, playing out in the woods, making up stories. Um, Ironically, I didn't actually have a lot of video games in my life. So I think in some ways that helped because I wasn't spending a lot of time. I was able to just work with my imagination more and didn't have as much coming in. And I would kind of get the only exposure to video games came from being around my cousin kind of once or twice a year, Thanksgiving. We would watch him play whatever video game was out at the time, Fallout, some Star Wars game. And that would bring that back to whatever I was doing. But kind of speeding ahead, I went to Champlain College in Vermont and was studying game art and animation there. And I would say at the time that I was very much a hard worker, but not a smart worker. I did what I was told. I Champlain is not just an art or tech school. We have a lot of education around like history and politics, and they combine a lot of their classes into um, just sub classes. Um, but so sorry to make it more simple, we had our art classes and then we had our more liberal arts classes, and I kind of split my time pretty evenly between those and was just doing it all at the time. But all of that shifted when I went to Montreal. And that's where I met Chris Cow, and he was one of our professors who was working on Mass Effect Andromeda at the time. And he was kind of the first guy who said, uh, if you want to be a character artist, you can do it. And that was just a message that I had never received from Champlain or from any other professors. It was always much more take the safe road, become an environment artist. There's more of them. That's what you should do. But in his class, I got totally hooked on character art. The very first night, I stayed up until something like 4 a.m. in the morning, just working on characters in ZBrush. And for the next 4 months, that just became my life. I would take my groceries to the lab. I had a sleeping bag. I would sleep under the table I was working at. And in that time, I created this character that ended up landing me an internship, got on the cover of a magazine, and that kind of got my foot in the door for the following semester. Um, and then getting to Insomniac, that final semester in Montreal, I had gone to a conference called the Game Developers Conference, GDC, and I had met Gavin G, who's my lead now, and we had stayed in touch all through my senior year. And when I finally applied to Insomniac, I had a couple other professors at that point, some industry contacts that were helping me out. But that eventually got me into Insomniac, and I've been there for about a year and a half now. So that's my story.
Nice. And
I'm here.
what drew you to video games in the first place? So it seems like your major was specifically video games, or was it more of a artist major, like an art
Yeah,
major?
the major was called game art and animation.
Okay.
And I think what drew me to it, again, I look back at this time of my life and say I was somewhat mindless. I mean, we were all kids at the time, right? And even as a teenager, at least for me, maybe you were more conscious of this at the time, but I kind of just knew the things I liked. I was told to follow what I was passionate about. And I just knew that I kind of had this love for creating worlds and creating characters. So I didn't question it as much as I probably should have. But for whatever reason, I loved watching my cousin play those video games. And that just became a big part of my life. It just kept growing.
Very cool. And
Yeah.
so I mean, it seems like there's the way you got your foot in the door. I mean, number one, you had this teacher that kind of acted as a mentor and like showed you that it was something that's possible. Then you put a lot of work in, developed the skills, and also like a touch of networking, right? Like you went to this conference and met this guy who eventually got you your first job or internship. Um, if you're talking to some guy that's, let's say he's in high school, senior year of high school, and he knows that he wants to play a role in designing video games. Um, he's really ambitious. He's willing to devote like the next 5 years of his life just to hustling every day. Like what guidebook would you give to him? That he can follow by the letter. Like what major should he take? What classes should he take? What skills should he focus on? What tools should he become better with? Like should he like set up coffee chats with people in the industry? Like what's the guidebook?
I love that question. It's almost like give me shivers down my back, just because that's the kind of person that we want to talk to, right? Like we see ourselves reflected in somebody like that, somebody who's passionate about it, somebody who's excited, ready to work hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rare combination. But if I was talking to somebody like that who has, the first thing I would say is make sure you've tested your idea, that you've talked to people in the industry, that you've made sure that this is really what you want to do. Um, and that I think you should continue to do all the way through. If you're saying this is a 4-year plan, never fall into that sunk cost fallacy, where after 3 years, if you suddenly realize this is not the path you want to take, realize you've been developing valuable skills the whole time and you still have your whole life ahead of you. So if you decide to suddenly not do character art, then don't be afraid to pivot just because you spent 3 years focusing on this. Those skills will carry forward into whatever you do next.
Mm-hmm.
But say this person has been studying character art the whole time and they end up choosing that path and they go forward with it. I would say the number one thing that has come up in the podcast that I do, where I talk to a lot of professionals, is the apprenticeship model. Is definitely people tend to trash talk schools a lot, even though almost every professional I talk to has had some kind of college background. Most of them have. They almost all say it was not worth the money. And what eventually got them their job was having some connection to a current professional. The fact is, I mean, Noman is a fantastic school that's right out here in LA, world class for the entertainment design. But nobody there, nobody who's a professor there who's not currently in the industry is going to be as up to date as somebody who's actually working in the industry all the time. You have to make those contacts. So whether you decide to go to college or you decide to do it on your own, making professional contacts who are in the industry right now is absolutely essential to making it. It's going to speed everything up, and it's really the only way that I think it's going to work.
And
Um,
how did you do that when you're going about it? Like, how do you recommend people reach out to? Like, let's say someone wants to work at Epic Games, which is kind of like the hot company right now. Like, how do they
yeah,
get in touch with someone at Epic Games? How do they build that network?
yeah, you want to go make some Fortnite skins? Let's go. This is a really good question, and it's funny that you're asking this right now because I actually was putting together yesterday one of the episodes that I'm planning to do over holiday break is focused on some of the tactics and strategies that I would give to a student like this,
And by the way,
who,
we'll plug your podcast in the comments or in the
yeah,
description, yeah. So if you guys want to check
I
that
think
out.
it's just fresh on my mind because we were just doing it yesterday. I'm not trying to overplug it right now. But one of the things that I want to talk about on it is what some of the strategies would be to, say, get a current professional to maybe Skype in and talk to the kids in your class, right? So even if I'm a student, I could cold message these people on something like ArtStation, or I even reached out to the very first person through Facebook Messenger, sent them a short and sweet message, something like, "Oh my gosh, your art is incredible. Here's my current portfolio, just a student portfolio, nothing special there." And I think I included something like, I know that you've only been in the industry for a little while. If you could just send me your favorite resource, what was the number one tutorial that you would recommend right now? That would be incredible. That was just enough to kind of get my foot in the door with this individual. And then occasionally, I think I sent them like updates of projects I was working on, little things like that. But I think that that's one of those areas where there are some clear tactics and approaches that you can use that are kind of tried and true across all industries to just start making those professional connections. And I want to really look at how students can start to use those.
Yeah.
They're super valuable.
So you're saying bringing in someone like to a class environment. I think that you think that's
Yeah,
a good way to get them in.
yeah, totally. And then looking at, so the key that I'm really trying to figure out here is, okay, what do you use to attract that professional? And I think, one of them is this is just like on the monetary side. Say somewhere like Insomniac, if we refer somebody, then we can actually get a bonus. So
Mm,
say I have what it is off the top of my head, but because it takes so much time for recruiters to find good people, if I can recruit somebody for Insomniac, I get say $1,000. If you're a student and you send over the very top portfolios from your class, you say, hey, these kids are about to graduate. If you want to make connections with those kids and then recommend them, you can actually make money from talking to these students and you get to feel good about what you're doing. That's one of my ideas on how you could maybe leverage I mean, as a student, you're not working with a whole lot, right? But
yeah,
maybe that's some kind of
that's
angle you could take.
that's smart. That's smart. So
You might,
besides,
we'll see.
what's that?
I was just saying, we'll see. It's something I haven't ever seen tested, but I'm hoping it works for somebody.
Yeah, yeah, someone's got to try this.
Yeah.
Um, Besides the networking side, let's say someone was reaching out to you and they're like, um, I'm not so college, no college. It seems like you can go both ways. what really matters, it seems like, is developing the skills, right? So, and a lot of that is probably going to be on your own time. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure.
So let's say someone
Either way.
wants to build those skills. What are projects they can work on their own time to develop those skills? And like, what are the skills that you actually want to build? Like, I know Maya is like a pretty big software in what you do, right? So is that a software you want to focus on? Yeah, like what would be a good project to focus on to develop those skills?
I think the absolute best way is to work on ArtStation, which is this amazing social media site for a lot of people in the entertainment design world who are on kind of the art side. Um, they host challenges. And there are a couple other sites that do similar challenges. There's almost always one that's going at the time. Whether if you're in college, a lot of times I would align those challenges with one of my classes, so I can kind of hit two birds with one stone. So I'd be working on a character for the challenge and my class, and then obviously if you're not in college, you can just be doing them. But what that does is it starts putting you in contact with other people who are on the same journey as you. There are also professionals who will be giving you feedback in those situations. You have a sort of community that you're building up, but you also have a very specific goal, and you have the possibility of a big payoff. If you can really knock it out of the park, then the professionals that judge those are the top in the industry, and you get promoted all over this massive website. Um, if you place in one of those, you have a very high chance of getting a position at a company.
Is that something
So
you
I
did
think
at the time?
one. I ended up actually doing, so the first ArtStation challenge was hosted, I think, the semester after I had got my internship. And I did that one, but I was so split between all of my college classes, the internship I was doing at the time, and trying to do that on top of it, that I did probably the worst character that I've ever done in my career for that challenge.
Okay.
So people can go back; it's still public, but yeah, I have done them before, and I see a lot of benefit to the people that have done it. Even for myself, it was helpful to have that kind of push from the challenge.
Okay, cool. Um, okay, so doing these challenges, building network. Let's say if you had to tell your 16-year-old self like college or no college, what would you tell him?
So personally, this is a really, really personal decision. Because I was homeschooled, I was extremely excited about trying college. And for me, it was definitely the right choice to take. The people who I met through that are lifelong best friends now,
Hmm.
and I mean we'll go camping together. I see them, I see us getting old together, right? Uh, and that was really really important to me. But I could also see a lot of people who have gone through school and look at it and say, "There's no way I'm dropping $200,000 or more on one of these college tuition," and that is completely reasonable because you can absolutely do what I did way faster and for way less money if you are okay not getting some of the liberal arts education and some of the networking and community benefits that you get from college.
Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What about resources? Are there any books? Are there any online classes that you've seen that are big in the industry that are really helpful for people that are getting started out?
Yeah, with any of those, there are a lot of good resources. ArtStation Learning was just hosted or posted recently, and they have a lot of new videos that are coming out. The important thing there is to just always make sure that the videos are relatively recent because the software changes so fast
Hmm.
that even if the video was posted a year ago, there have probably been updates. The process is different. Again, that's why it's so important to have a current industry professional who's kind of coaching you and double checking what you're doing because you might be investing your time in something that's just outdated at that point. As for the book, number one book that I recommend to anyone, anywhere, this book right
Oh,
here, Design for Life. That was a favorite of yours too. Bill Burnett and Dave Evans from the Stanford Design School.
yeah, it's really
Um,
good.
that I've reread that book so many times. That's at least 1 year, one time a year, I'll go through it and just the exercises are so amazing for kind of taking a step back in your life, getting a broader perspective, making sure that you're balancing the things you really value, that you're going in the right direction. I truly would, that book would have changed my life for the better, big time if I'd gotten it earlier on. And I just can't recommend it enough to people.
Same here. You just made me want to revisit that book because it is really good, and I haven't read it in over like a year and a half, so gonna have to check it out again.
Yeah, it's one of the few that I have a hardcover of, or actually a hard book of. Everything else is on the Kindle now. But
Yeah,
yeah, if you want to borrow it, I'll send it over.
for sure. So okay, so I mean we've covered a lot of stuff for people that want to get into who want to become like a character designer. What am I missing? Like what crucial piece of advice would you give on top of what we've already discussed to young Colton who's starting off?
The biggest piece that I felt like I was missing when I started Insomniac that feels so obvious now, um, but that I really didn't realize was how much your personality matters in this job.
Okay.
Uh, I always assumed that obviously your work has to be really, really good. That's the number one piece. But the fact is that as soon as you're good enough, um, my coworkers, I would rather them just be more enjoyable people to be around than for them to be better artists. Because the fact is, their art doesn't actually impact me at all, but their personalities, their smile when they come into work, the baked goods that they so often bring with them, those have a massive impact on my life. And vice versa, right? If I'm the kind of person who brings that kind of energy or those kinds of food items, that can positively impact them a lot. And it's the little things, man. Like I really, if I could go back 2 years and just say, Colton, like try this thing. For me, it would be improv. Like that was a big game changer for the way that I present myself, and I think I'm a little bit more entertaining than I was before, and I think it's just kind of polished off a lot of rough edges on my personality. Um, but just realizing that there is so much value in those things, that those aren't just, I mean, those soft skills are so, so important.
Mm.
And I really did not realize that uh, until I was actually working.
So don't ignore those in college. Go to those parties.
Yeah, and I mean, it's obvious and we talk about it. Like, we know it's important, right? But I did not realize how important they were. It's so important. It's more important than your skills once you're actually working. I would say that.
That's very interesting.
Yeah,
All
or at
right.
least on par.
So what does a character artist actually do? What can you tell me a little more about what your day to day looks like? There's this question I like to ask, which is, if your job was divided, if your time was divided in a pie chart, what would that breakdown look like? Like how much time you spend in meetings, how much time you spend researching characters, how much time you actually spend drawing. What would that breakdown look like?
Yeah, speaking of baked goods, let's talk about pie charts. Pumpkin pie for this time of the year. So what's cool about my job is that I don't spend a lot of time in meetings. I like that. A quick walkthrough of my day would be the pod that I'm kind of in, the character artist. They tend to get into work pretty early. Um, so I'll usually roll in. I'll meditate outside in the sunlight. We're on kind of a nice campus with like Pixar and a couple other studios. So I'll go out. I have like a 10-minute meditation thing I'll do in the sun. Head in. We start around 8 o'clock. Um, because we're all there on the early side, for the first hour, we're pretty chatty. Like we'll kind of be catching up, talking about Tesla Cybertruck just came out. What do you think? Oh my God, it looks so bad. No, it's so cool. Whatever. Um, use that time to kind of bond, look at what you're doing, give quick critiques. And then it's usually headphones on and people just working pretty hard for those first few hours. Sometimes people are in and out of quick meetings, but a lot of times now there's options to just basically Skype into those meetings or Zoom into them now. So
Okay.
people go to meetings by sitting still at their desk too.
Really? Even if it's in the same
Yeah,
building?
yeah, even if it's in the same building, which is super nice because then usually you can do some kind of work on the side. Um, then a lot of us will either go, so when it rolls around to lunchtime, I hit the gym and then I like to eat at my desk. But twice a week we'll play soccer. That's always really fun. There's a big board game club that's kind of started up at Insomniac, and that's really, really cool to see. So people play board games at lunch. Usually it's an hour, or half an hour, depending on how long you want your day to go on. But then, yeah, you'll come back. Maybe you'll have meetings in the afternoon. But I would say that I only have 2 to 3 meetings a week, and those go for only about half an hour each.
Wow.
So we're very meeting light. But that's at my level. If you're a lead, you're in and out of a lot more meetings than that.
Okay.
And then I'll usually wrap up around like 5 or 6 o'clock. So that's the pie.
So like, um, let's get more detail on the pie. Let's get into the ingredient list. So,
Right? Dive
so
in.
so the pumpkin for this pumpkin pie would be you actually just sculpting figures in Maya, or like what does that look like? How much
Yeah,
time do you spend researching? How much time you just spend drawing? Is it 80% of your time you're spending drawing or
yeah. The big programs they use right now, ZBrush is the big sculpting one.
okay?
Maya is kind of like the program that we use to like export things into our engine, and we fix a lot of things there. We pass it along to other teams. Um, Marvelous Designer is a big one that's been coming in now that is used for making clothing. So it's for simulating cloth. You'll see that a lot of like Pixar movies, anything where people are moving around. There's fabric. You're usually using something like that. And then Substance, which is now owned by Adobe. They do a lot of texturing, so any of the color material work that usually starts in Substance Painter. Um, yeah, so for the other ingredients, uh, I would say, sorry, going back to the question that you just asked, what was the other
So
part of that?
like in more detail, like what exactly, um, like it could be the answer could be just like, oh, you spend like all day basically in this ZBrush software drawing. If that's it, fair enough. But is there anything else? Like, is there research involved? Is there anything else
Right.
involved in your day to day?
Yeah, so this is another transition from when you were a student to as an associate character artist is my position right now. Characters take so long to do that we tend to have, so say it takes me a month to do a full character. Maybe for that first week, like the first whole day is just spent finding references. And then I'm doing a blockout sculpt. And then maybe I'm doing a quick substance painter, getting textures in, showing it off to leads, getting feedback. It's every day is sort of a chunk of that process. It's not over the course of the day I'm doing these different things. The part that really changes when you're working as a production artist is that you're not just working on a character for a set amount of time all the time.
Hmm.
You also have all of these little moments where something didn't work out in animation, so it comes back to you and you have to make these changes, or somebody else has made this character and now we have to use their jacket on a different character. So instead of making that jacket from scratch, you have to make all these changes to it, and then you're maybe retexturing this, you're adding a logo, and that gets passed on, or you're setting up the randomization for these characters. That is a completely different job than I ever really expected having. I mean, it doesn't involve sculpting or texturing, or this is figuring out how do I get blue jeans, gray jeans, and black jeans on all the guys in this part of this area of our game. Um, those are yeah, those are some other more granular ingredients in the day.
Gotcha. Do you enjoy that stuff, or do you prefer the just in-depth like character focusing on the character sculpting?
I prefer the sculpting big time.
What's
I think most of us would say that. I mean, we got
that?
into this
That
job because we like the art side of it.
yeah.
And I think it helps if you play games and that you understand and appreciate the final product that you're making. But because I don't play a lot of video games, I think that is the biggest challenge for me right now is that when it comes to setting up these things like our configurations for characters where we're just setting up randomization and things, I don't appreciate the same way that somebody who actually plays games does.
Hmm.
So that's a bit of a challenge for me, but it's a relatively small part of the job.
Gotcha. So that kind of goes into like myths that people have about the career of a character artist. Like what, like I'm guessing a lot of people that get into character drawing or being a character artist for like a video game company, they play a lot of video games, right? And so I'm guessing they have a lot of impressions of what their career is actually like before getting into it. Do you have like just from colleagues and stuff? Do you have any um, do you have some myths that people have come into with the job into the job and um, kind of had this perception of what the job was like, and they were kind of disappointed once they got the job because of that disillusion?
Well, I think you just spoke to a big one, which is you see this in college, especially where people are like, yeah, I like playing video games, so I must like making them too. Realize those are very, very different jobs. And you see that with the dropout rate early
Mm.
on. I mean, both of my roommates who were involved with, one was a game artist, one was a game designer. They didn't make it to the first year because they liked playing the games and that's all they did, right?
So that was roommates
Um,
in college, right?
those are my roommates in college. But what's interesting is that that same pattern in a lot of ways happens when you get to the professional level. And you don't see people drop out necessarily. I think later on they do. Um, but I think that there is still this transition from again being a student to being a professional. It's not actually the same thing. Even if you're using the same skills, what you're actually working on and possibly being fulfilled by is it's different. And I do a lot of people don't expect that. I didn't realize that that would be the case at all. And it goes back to things like setting up those configs and all of these parts of being a production artist that I didn't realize as a student, right? These are kind of the drudgery and the tasks that I hope AI is able to take over soon so that I can actually go back to doing my art. That's a big con for me right now,
Hmm.
is just not actually getting to do art all the time.
And actually, so I since you're bringing it up, going back to the last questions about like what percentage of your job is that more that work that you don't like as much, which is not just building a character, like what percentage of your job is that versus full on character building, developing, drawing?
That's a good question because it it feels like it's such a big part of my job because when you're in the flow state and you're sculpting, right? Like that seems like it goes by in a snap.
Mm.
Um, a big part of it depends on what part of the production cycle you're in. So, because I've only been working for a year and a half, I only have a certain amount of things I can compare this to. But I know that as you approach the end of a game, there's going to be more of that bug fixing and working on like the smaller things that are not like the big fun blue sky art stuff, right?
Yeah.
So early on in a project, probably more art, more fun, and then later on, it's going to be more of the bug fixing. Um, So yeah, it's harder to break that down into how that fits into our pie. I can't even picture that off the top of my head because it's such an emotional piece of the game for me. It's
Yeah,
like I really don't like this part and I love this part. So it's hard to know how much time I actually spend on those.
gotcha. That makes sense. Um, all right, so back to the myths. Are there any other myths or illusions that people have about the career that are not true, or is that the? I'm guessing that's probably the main one, but are there any others?
I think one that I think reflects a couple of things that I've kind of brought up in this, um, and well, it speaks to what we were just talking about too, is that there are a lot of unhappy character artists, and this is a big question of mine. I started seeing this pattern when I was up in Montreal. Um, I just noticed a lot of people who had worked really, really hard to get that position and then were just unhappy. They were unfulfilled.
Mm.
And I'm not always sure if they just would have been like that if they were doing anything in life. Like maybe if they were a banker, they'd feel the same way. Or if they were working at Apple, they'd still just be unhappy people, right? But when you see it with so many who are all doing the same thing, so many character artists feeling this way, that was a pattern that I recognized. And again, that I hope to just explore more around why that is the case in the conversations that I have with people, both in my life and through the podcast. Um, that's it's not really a specific myth, but I think that that's kind of a red flag that I would put out there for people is there are yeah there's something that I mean even the people who make it are not always happy, and you it's probably worth asking why, because you don't want to work really hard, get there, and then not love where you are.
And do you have
And
any?
and
Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
Do you have any
Well,
inkling
that
of?
kind of goes into one of the beautiful things about character artists is that we are incredibly privileged to get to do what we do. And I think a part of me saying that is the fact that I am still young and that I'm new to this industry, and I am still kind of basking in the glow of getting to have made it, right? And then I get to work on, a game like Spider-Man when that came out. And it's hard for me to then look at people who have been here for a while and be like, why are you not happy with what you're doing right now? This is such an incredible place to work. But sorry, you had a question a second ago.
So yeah, so I guess I know you're on this quest to figure that basically answer that question, but do you have any inkling of why that is that so many character artists are kind of disenchanted?
I think that it goes back to the fact that we are production artists and not artists. I think that as students, you are able to, whether or not you realize it, you actually have a lot of say over the projects that you're doing. And even if I say, hey, you got to go make a box, right? You got to make a crate. You could do a treasure chest or you could do a fucking wooden crate. Sorry, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if I can swear. Um, and that artistic freedom, that's what excites us as artists. As soon as you're a cog in the machine, that strips you of your artistic freedom and your humanity in certain ways. And I think that's a big reason for it.
That's funny, yeah, that you mentioned that. So, like, just doing a little research for this interview, um, I was I saw this one video is this guy that basically was doing concept art from home as a freelance artist, and so it kind of seems like the best of both worlds, right? Where it's like you still get to work on. I think he was still working on some video games, or even the movie industry, doing some stuff. Um, but he's able to explore that creative aspect of the job, and like he kind of has like a almost like a freak, like a carte blanche, you know, he can explore. Um, so is that something you see a lot of people kind of going towards, or is that like a common path for a character artist to go down?
I wouldn't say that it's common, but I would like it to be a lot more common. I think that the world is headed in that direction, and I think the smartest people in a lot of industries are looking at it and saying, "Yeah, I think I can get the best of both worlds here. I think I can go this freelance route and continue to do what first got me excited about this without having to do some of the drudgery around it." Yeah, certainly, this concept artist you're talking about, the person like Vitaly Bulgarov is one who pops into my head, who did a lot of like the original designs for like the Transformers. I was listening to him on an interview recently, and you hear him and you hear the excitement in his voice, and getting like he chooses these projects that he really loves, and he's insanely talented and incredibly hardworking. But he's played his cards right, and he's set himself up for being in a position where he can be fulfilled as an artist.
Hmm.
And I think that there are a lot of opportunities like that I want to see more artists and character artists take advantage of, because I think the world, it's going in that direction with things like Patreon too, and all the tutorials and the assets that you can put out on these stores now. I mean, you can make an income through other means now. You don't have to rely on these companies the same way that our grandfathers maybe did.
Do
Um,
you like do you still think it's a good idea? Like, if that's something that someone like eventually aspires to, right? To operate within that more creative realm. Like, do you think it's still a good idea for them to go work for like an established company like Epic Games or Insomniac to kind of get a lay of the land, or like, do you think they should just like aim straight for that position and just like start doing that as soon as possible, like starting freelance as soon as they graduate?
that's a very similar question to the should I go to college or should I not, and teach myself
Hmm.
question. Um, and I think that I would say again that it's up to that individual. I have gained a tremendous amount from going to a stable working environment where I'm surrounded by incredibly talented people who have taught me so much. I have baller health insurance. We get paid decently well. Good bonuses, great holiday parties, good community. Where I am right now, that's beautiful, right?
Mm.
And you can tell that I'm still just excited about that, right? I'm excited about life. I haven't had to, life hasn't drained out of my eyes yet.
Yep.
Um,
Sorry, you cut off for like 20 seconds.
sorry, uh, jump back into it. I think that so the gist of it is, I think places like established companies are really, really valuable for early on in your career, or if that's what the individual wants. I've certainly had a great time at Insomniac, and I love it there right now. But I think for a lot of people, a lot of artists especially, they may find more fulfillment in a more freelancing approach.
Cool. All right, very cool, dude. Yeah, that's very interesting. Even for myself, who's not in the industry. Um,
Yeah,
so
there's certainly a overlap with other creative industries and things in tech and in marketing. They all share similarities, I think, with freelancers and should I go work for this company? Should I do my own thing? As soon as you're working on a computer, it offers a lot of those opportunities.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so if you're not aiming for long term for that freelance route, what are different career paths that, like, let's say you could be on as a character artist? Like, I know you mentioned that you can become a character lead, but what are all the
Mhm.
different paths, if you had to map them out, of that an ambitious character artist can kind of aim at?
Yeah, if you were going to be, let's say, a company man, and oftentimes you could still be moving between companies, but say again, you're not taking the freelance road, right?
Hmm.
It is relatively standardized across the AAA industry where you are going from associate to mid-level to a senior and then a lead, maybe an art director after that. There's like this principal artist thing that gets kind of tossed in there sometimes as well, but that is kind of there are a lot of different definitions across different studios for those. So that's a relatively standard trajectory if you wanted to stay in AAA. The other side, of course, is that indie is also an option, right? Like we weren't really talking about that as well, but a lot of people I've seen go from AAA studios to indie companies and get usually a little bit more risk, a little more reward with those.
Mm.
But people also choose them because there's less grind, less burnout there. And so if you're having like a family at that point and you find an indie studio that will pay you adequately, I've seen a lot of people really enjoy that as well.
That's interesting. I would have thought that because like in the startup world, if you go in the business world, like if you go work for a tech company, um, like a lot of times it will be more work than a more established company. But you're saying in the gaming industry, if you go for an indie company, it's usually more work-life balance.
I think it really depends on the startup, right? So I started at the internship that I got in Montreal was at a startup.
Hmm.
And that was a crazy time because I was pretty much the only person who spoke English. And that was a challenge in itself. I should have had you there as a translator, actually. So at that studio, I think it was different because in general in Montreal and in Canada as a whole, you have more work-life balance. It's just way more stress there, just
Mm.
anywhere besides America, really. Um, but I have a friend who's at an indie studio right now, and he loves it, but he works all the time, right? So, I mean, that's a weird one because there are people who work at these companies as well, someplace like Insomniac, and they may work 12, 14-hour days too. I certainly know people who do that as well. But I think that there's a lot of flexibility with indie companies. It really just depends on where you go and what kind of game they're making.
Gotcha. And so for that career path, what are the differences that between those different roles, those different levels of the roles? Like I'm guessing, as you um, as you get more and more advanced and you get those higher ranking roles, like you get more management responsibilities. I'm imagining. Is that always the case, or like what are the differences?
Quite often, yeah, there is kind of a split where you're going so associate, mid level. At that point, you can go kind of in the leadership direction, right? Where you're probably spending more time in project management stuff, you're spending more time in Excel, or you can continue more in the art direction. And with that, you're defining like the style of the next game. Maybe you're working on projects that are coming out in like 5 or 6 years. You're experimenting with the newest programs that are out there. That is kind of a split, and either one of them, as far as I can tell, across different studios can go back into the art director role at the top. I would say that more traditionally, as you just continue, down the lead, that is probably going more towards becoming an art director. So
Okay.
if you really want to do art direction for a company, you want to have more of the management skills, more of the management background. But they tend to develop those pretty well at the companies, I think. So, and as an individual, it's pretty easy to find opportunities to build up leadership capabilities. So I think
Nice.
that's kind of the biggest split. Yeah, if you want to do more art or lead people.
Gotcha. All right. So this might be redundant, so let me know if it is, but what would you say are the three pros of your role, and what are three cons of the role of character artist?
Yeah, I think. I mean, the answers will be somewhat redundant probably too, because I think we were talking about a lot of these. But I wrote these down just so I can run through them quickly. I would say that the three cons, because I want to end on a high note. Um, being a production artist to me can sometimes be a con because you feel like a cog. I would also say one that we haven't really talked about too much is that being an artist is extremely time consuming,
Mm.
and it's difficult to leverage our abilities. And it's something that I'm often jealous of in more of the tech world, where if you're the kind of person who can make some kind of new app and then millions of people download it the next day and cash out, that is something that's relatively hard to have as an artist. It's like it just takes so long to make one character,
It's hard
and
to
then it
scale.
needs to go. It's so hard to scale, man. Really, really hard to scale. And then the third one that I've talked about quite a bit is that it seems like there's a lot of unhappy character artists, and we've already kind of dug into that one a lot. On the positive side, uh, again, I think we are just extremely privileged to be able to to work on something that really isn't like a life or death kind of situation, right? Like this isn't feeding people. Um, it's not, pharmaceuticals, anything like that. But this is kind of the spice of life, right? It's like this is the escape that some people get. Or maybe you take it in the education direction and you use entertainment to talk to people, or even better. I mean, to me, it's this ability, especially with character art, to make characters that can speak directly to people without having to use our words, right?
Mm.
Like one of my favorite quotes out there is paraphrasing from Leo Tolstoy, but art is the exchange of emotion from one man to another. And characters specifically are so relatable that you can create something that can speak to a child as much as an adult in the flash of a second, right? And they can see that, and you can convey something valuable about humanity. I think that's really, really extraordinary about being an artist and being a character artist specifically. Um, I think the final other one is that I just am really grateful for getting to work around super talented people. I mean, to see one of my characters come to life when you have a professional person rig it up, another professional person animate it, another professional add the special effects to it, and then the game designer put all the what actually happens together in the program. I mean, every little piece of that coming together. This is the flip side of being a production artist. When you are just that one cog, but you see all those cogs come together and create a beautiful masterpiece like that,
Mm.
extraordinary, man. I mean, the people around me have abilities that I consider to be magical, and that those are the highest points for me.
Yeah, because overall it's like a very competitive industry, right? So that means also that you're playing with a lot of just really good players.
Yeah, and I'm careful about when I use that word competitive because it's easy to fall into the trap of like, yeah, I have to sort of bring down other people. I have to just be better than them, right? I don't see it that way at all, and most of the best pros that I know don't see it that way either. Um, I think, yeah, there. It's like this is something that my mom told me when I was kind of really struggling um, in Montreal when I was taking that first class. I hadn't made it at all, right? And she had said one time when my professor was kind of like, I think he'd been in a bad mood and he'd really just brought us all down and be like, yeah, you guys are probably never going to make it, right? And she just said something like, the walls are only there to make sure that you want it badly enough, right? Like you don't want to get there and then have just any Joe Schmo be able to walk in the door and work there too. You
Mm.
want to be able to prove yourself so that when you get there, you're there with a community of other people who are like-minded, who deserve to be on that level. And that also just sounds like kind of cocky to say, but I mean those are the people that I want to be around, right?
Yeah,
Is the people who are working really hard to make the world a better place.
I love it, man. It's a great place to end it. Um, can you? So Colton has a really great podcast that he's starting right now, where he's interviewing a bunch of people. It's mostly character artists, right? Or is it?
We've started with some character artists, but we called it shape language because we're really looking to branch out with other artists. So we've already had an environment artist from the recent Star Wars game that came out,
All right.
and we're definitely, yeah, we're looking to talk to a lot more 2D artists and concept artists in the future.
Gotcha. Yeah, so if for anyone that's interested in getting in the video game art industry, I guess, Colton's podcast, we're going to link it below. Um, and thanks for watching. I hope you got some value off of this. Have a good
Hey,
one,
thanks
guys.
so much for having me on, dude. Nothing but love, Jeremy.
Same here, brother. Thanks for being on. All right, guys, I hope you got value out of this interview. If you did, make sure to smash that like button. If you have any questions for Colton, make sure to drop them in the comments, and I'll ask him to answer you guys in the comments. Until next time, guys, have a good day.